He had already signed the papers in his mind before she walked through the door. Isabelle Crane knew that because of the way Trevor looked at her, not with anger, not with guilt, but with the flat, practiced patience of a man waiting for a formality to end. He sat at the far end of the conference table at Whitmore & Banks, one of the most expensive law firms in Seattle, in a charcoal suit that cost more than her first car. Beside him sat Paige Holloway in a cream blazer, her hand resting near his on the table, close enough to be a statement. Isabelle sat down across from them and placed a manila folder on the glass surface. Inside it was everything Trevor Vail had tried to hide. Please, before we go any further, if this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to keep sharing stories like this one. Now, let's continue. Isabelle Crane was 37 years old, 5 weeks out from double reconstruction surgery, and still wearing compression wraps under her blazer. Her oncologist had cleared her to attend today's meeting under one condition: no more than 3 hours on her feet. Her attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana Forsyth, had insisted on picking her up herself that morning. "You sure about this?" Dana had asked from the driver's seat. Isabelle had looked out the window at the gray Seattle skyline. "He scheduled the divorce settlement during my recovery. He didn't postpone a single thing. So no, I'm not postponing either." Dana had nodded and said nothing more. The conference room on the 22nd floor smelled of fresh coffee and nervous money. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Elliott Bay. Trevor sat with his own attorney, a silver-haired man named Gideon Park, who had apparently been the one to push the settlement through quickly. Before Isabelle was fully recovered, before she had time to review the details carefully, before anyone thought to look too closely at the holding company Trevor had created 14 months ago. Trevor Ashworth was not a billionaire in the flashy sense. He didn't have a yacht or a helicopter pad. What he had was quieter than that and harder to see: a commercial real estate development firm worth somewhere north of $300 million, a name on 6 buildings in downtown Seattle, and the kind of reputation that moved in rooms Isabelle had once believed she helped him build. She had met him 12 years ago at an architecture firm, where she worked as a structural engineer. Trevor had come in to discuss plans for a mixed-use tower he wanted to develop. He had been charming, a little uncertain, recently out of a failed business partnership that had left him rebuilding from scratch. Isabelle had stayed 2 hours past closing to explain load-bearing constraints on a napkin sketch. He called the next day, not to follow up on the project. He said she was the most honest person in a room full of people getting paid to agree with him. She believed that mattered. For 7 years it did. Then the company grew. Then the name on the door stopped being Trevor's alone and started being a brand. Then the charity galas, the magazine features, the expansion into Portland, and then Denver, and then Los Angeles. Then Paige Holloway arrived as a brand consultant hired to reposition Trevor's image from regional developer to national visionary. Isabelle had noticed it the way you notice a small sound in the wall: inconsistent, easy to dismiss, then suddenly impossible to ignore. Late dinners that ran until midnight. A conference in Napa she wasn't invited to. A hotel charge in a city where no project existed. A text she saw for half a second before Trevor turned the screen over, and his face did the thing faces do when the body hasn't caught up with the lie yet. She had been 40 days into chemotherapy when she confronted him. She was sitting in the bedroom they had shared for 9 years, wearing a headscarf and a bathrobe, and she was so tired she could barely lift her arms. He stood near the window overlooking Lake Union, and she asked him directly. No preamble. Just the question. He didn't deny it. He said he was sorry. He said things had been difficult. He said distance and stress, and he didn't know how to be what she needed right now. She stared at him. Right now, meaning, while I have cancer, he looked at the floor. She understood then that the distance he described was not something that had happened to their marriage. It was something he had chosen, incrementally, quietly, over 18 months, until the choice had accumulated enough weight that he felt justified. The divorce papers arrived 11 days later. She was in her 3rd round of chemotherapy. His lawyers had moved fast. The settlement offer looked reasonable, generous even, on the surface. A lump sum, the house in Montlake, a percentage of Trevor's declared assets. But Isabelle had been an engineer long enough to know the difference between what a structure showed and what it was hiding. She gave the documents to Dana and asked her to go deeper. Dana had gone very deep. Now in the conference room, Gideon Park adjusted his glasses and opened his own folder. "We're here to finalize the dissolution agreement. Both parties have reviewed the terms. We have some revisions," Dana said pleasantly. Gideon looked up. Dana placed the first document on the table. "This is the original Articles of Incorporation for Ashworth Holdings, filed 9 years ago. Both parties are listed as joint founders. Both signatures are on the founding documents." Trevor's jaw tightened. Isabelle was a silent partner. She wasn't operationally involved. She provided the foundational structural analysis for the Cascade Tower project that secured your first institutional investor, Dana said. She worked without compensation for 14 months during the early phase because your operating capital didn't support a full engineering team. We have the invoices she never sent, the emails documenting her contributions, and 3 former employees prepared to confirm her role. Paige uncrossed her legs under the table. Gideon whispered something to Trevor. Dana placed a second document down. "This is the transfer paperwork moving the Tillamook Properties portfolio from Ashworth Holdings into a shell entity called Vantage 11 LLC, incorporated in Delaware 14 months ago." The room went quiet. Trevor's eyes moved to Paige. It was a small movement, a reflex, but everyone in the room saw it. Paige's hand left the table. 14 months ago, Dana continued, Isabelle was undergoing a biopsy that would result in her cancer diagnosis. The transfer was completed 9 days after her diagnosis was confirmed. Isabelle did not look at Trevor. She looked at the bay through the window and kept her hands flat on her folder. "That timing is coincidental," Gideon said. "Coincidences are very expensive in discovery," Dana replied. Gideon requested a 10-minute recess. Trevor stood and turned toward Paige and said something low and sharp that Isabelle could not hear. What she could see was Paige's face, the way the color shifted in it, the way her expression changed from composed to something more careful, the way she looked at Trevor and then looked at the table and then looked at nothing in particular, like a person doing quiet arithmetic. Isabelle stepped into the hallway with Dana. She leaned against the wall and breathed. Her incision sites ached. She had taken her pain medication at 7 that morning, and it was now past 11, and she could feel the edges of it wearing off. She breathed through it. "You're doing well," Dana said. "I feel like I'm doing math during a fire drill," Dan almost smiled. "That describes most litigation." Isabelle looked down the hallway. Everything was marble and silence. There were fresh-cut flowers on the reception desk that probably cost $300, and she thought about the months she had sat in treatment chairs staring at the ceiling, counting tiles, and the fact that Trevor had not come to a single appointment after the first one, and the fact that she had told herself for weeks it was the business pressure, not the other woman, because believing the first was something she could survive, and believing the second was something she wasn't sure she could. She had survived both. She was here. There is a version of this story where Isabelle Crane is the woman who lost, the one who had cancer and a failing marriage, and a husband who rewrote the financial history of their life together, while she was too sick to watch closely. There are women who have lived that version. Isabelle had known, sitting in the treatment center, that she could become one of them. She had decided not to. She had called Dana from a hospital parking lot on a Tuesday in November, still wearing her infusion arm wrap, and said, "I need you to look at everything. Every LLC, every transfer, every date." Dana had done exactly that. What they found was not complicated, exactly. It was simply hidden, the way things are hidden when someone believes the person they're hiding from is too exhausted and too sick to look. 14 months of asset restructuring. 3 properties moved out of joint marital reach. A 4th, a mixed-use development in Pioneer Square that Isabelle had actually co-designed the structural plans for a decade ago, quietly transferred to Vantage 11, where Paige Holloway was listed as a strategic advisor. That last detail had made Dana set down her coffee cup very carefully. It also explained, Isabelle had realized the look on Paige's face this morning when the documents came out. Because Paige's name was on papers she perhaps hadn't fully read, and the man who had put her name there had also spent months telling her. Isabelle suspected that his wife was unstable, that the marriage was long dead, that Isabelle was clinging to assets she hadn't earned, and a lifestyle she'd never deserve on her own. It was a familiar architecture. Isabelle recognized the load-bearing lies. When the recess ended and everyone returned to the table, something had shifted. Paige sat slightly apart from Trevor. Not dramatically. Just a few inches. The kind of distance that begins when a person realizes they are no longer certain of the ground beneath them. Gideon Park made a new offer. Still not adequate. Dana made a counter. Trevor looked at Isabelle for the first time since she'd entered the room. His expression was difficult to read. Not guilt exactly. Not anger exactly. Something more like the discomfort of a man who had built a story about a situation and was now watching the story fail its structural inspection. "You don't have to make this so difficult," he said. It was directed at Isabelle. She met his eyes. "I survived chemotherapy in an empty house. This isn't difficult, Trevor. This is Tuesday." Paige looked down at the table. The meeting ended without a final agreement. Gideon requested more time. Dana agreed to 48 hours before they filed for emergency financial discovery. In the elevator going down, Dana said, "You know he's going to make calls tonight. I know. He'll try to get ahead of the Pioneer Square issue before it surfaces publicly. I know that too." Dana looked at her. "Are you okay?" Isabelle thought about the question honestly. Her incisions ached. She was exhausted. She would go home to the Montlake house and sit in the kitchen that still had Trevor's coffee mug on the shelf, because she hadn't moved it yet. Not from sentiment, but because she kept forgetting to, and she would make tea and take her evening medication and check in with her surgeon, and probably cry for about 12 minutes before stopping, because she had learned that 12 minutes was enough to release the pressure and not enough to collapse entirely. "I will be," she said. That was the truest answer she had. 3 days later, Isabelle received an email from an address she didn't recognize. No subject line, 1 paragraph and 4 attachments. The paragraph said, "I was given information about you that was not true. I made decisions based on that information that I would not have made otherwise. I can't undo that. What I can do is make sure the record is accurate. The attached files are from Trevor's internal communications. I kept copies because something felt wrong, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling until now. I'm sorry I didn't listen to it sooner." The attachments were an internal email chain between Trevor and Gideon Park, discussing the optimal timeline to finalize the divorce before Isabelle's health stabilized, a memo from Trevor's CFO outlining the Tillamook transfer as a protective measure pending marital dissolution, a summary of the Pioneer Square property's assessed value, including a line that read "Original Structural Plans by I. Crane, 2014, and a message from Trevor to Paige sent 11 months ago that read, "She won't fight this. She's too tired and she doesn't have the money. Just let the lawyers handle it." Isabelle read that last line twice. Then she forwarded everything to Dana. An hour later, she got a text from an unknown number. "It's Paige. I know you don't owe me anything. I don't expect anything. But if you need a witness, I'll testify." Isabelle stared at the message for a long time. She typed back, "Okay." That was all. What followed happened faster than Trevor had anticipated. Dana filed the motion. The judge ordered full financial disclosure. The Pioneer Square transfer, with Isabelle's original engineering plans on record, became the central exhibit. Trevor's board was notified by counsel. His business partner in the Denver expansion quietly began reviewing their agreements. A profile piece in a Seattle business journal that had been scheduled to run in 2 weeks was quietly pulled when the reporter learned about the investigation. Trevor called Isabelle on a Thursday evening. She almost didn't answer. Then she remembered Dana's advice to keep all communications documented. She answered on speaker. "Isabelle." His voice was different, not the Trevor of the conference room. Smaller. "What do you want, Trevor? I want to talk about this. Your lawyer has my lawyer's number. I want to talk to you." A pause. "About all of it." She waited. "I handled this badly," he said. Isabelle set down her tea. "You transferred property out of our marital estate while I was in chemotherapy. You hired a lawyer to structure a settlement designed to finalize before I had energy to read it carefully. You told your girlfriend that I was too tired to fight back and let the lawyers handle it." She kept her voice even. "That's not handling something badly, Trevor. That's a plan." Silence. I was afraid, he said finally. Of what? Of all of it, the illness, not knowing if. He stopped. I didn't know how to be in it with you, so you left me in it alone and moved the money. He had no answer for that. I spent 4 months in treatment going to every appointment by myself, she said. I learned how to change my own dressings. I cooked dinner, standing at the stove, holding the counter, because I was too dizzy to trust my legs, and I did it because there was no one else there. And while I was doing that, you were restructuring the assets and telling Paige I was too weak to notice. Isabelle, you don't get to call this a mistake because the consequences found you. Her voice cracked just once. You made calculations. I was one of the variables. You were wrong about which way I'd fall. He was quiet for a long time. The Pioneer Square building, he said at last. Your prints are on the original structural filing. I know. The design wouldn't have passed inspection without that work. I know that too. I should have. He stopped again. You should have done a lot of things, she said. What do you want, Trevor? Specifically, I want to settle this without destroying everything. Then tell Gideon to call Dana tomorrow with a real number. One that includes Pioneer Square at fair valuation. And drop the challenge to my co-founder status. A long pause. Okay, he said. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen for a while after. The coffee mug was still on the shelf. She looked at it. Then she stood up, took it down, and put it in a box she was assembling for donation. It was a small thing, but she had learned that recovery was mostly small things done in the right order. What came next was not thunder. It was paperwork. It was a revised settlement. It was the Pioneer Square property appraised at current market value, 42% of which was awarded to Isabelle, based on documented original contribution. It was Tillamook Properties returned to joint marital assets for division. It was co-founder status acknowledged in the final decree. It was Paige Holloway giving a sworn deposition that corroborated the asset transfer timeline and confirmed Trevor's instructions to conceal the restructuring. It was Trevor's CFO, facing potential professional liability, providing a full accounting to the court. It was the Denver partner who quietly completed his review and called Trevor to say he was restructuring their agreement. Isabelle did not watch any of it with satisfaction exactly. That surprised her. She had expected satisfaction. What she felt instead was something quieter, the specific relief of a structure that has been under hidden stress finally being properly supported. She understood that feeling from her work. When a building has been compensating for an unaddressed load for long enough, the repair doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like stillness. The final divorce decree was signed on a Wednesday morning in February. It was raining, which in Seattle meant nothing in particular. Isabelle signed where Dana indicated and did not linger over it. There was no ceremony to it. There was a notary and a filing stamp, and then it was done. Outside on the courthouse steps, Trevor was there. He had waited. She hadn't expected that. He looked thinner. He had, she understood, lost the Denver deal entirely. The Seattle profile piece had been replaced by a shorter item about ongoing litigation. His board had restructured his authority, while the financial review was in process. These were not small things for a man whose identity had been built around the precision of his control. He didn't move toward her. He stood at the edge of the steps with his hands in his coat pockets. I started seeing someone, he said. A therapist. He paused, not because my lawyer told me to, because I sat in my apartment one night and couldn't figure out how I had become the person who did what I did. Isabelle looked at him. And I don't have an answer yet. She nodded slowly. That's more honest than most things you've said in 2 years. He accepted that without flinching. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I know I don't get that. No, she said. Not yet. He looked at her. The yet was not a promise. She could see him understand that. I heard you're taking on independent projects again, he said. She had. 4 months ago, before the settlement was final, she had reached out to a former colleague at a small structural firm that did adaptive reuse work on older buildings. They had offered her a consulting contract. She had taken it. The first project was a 1920s warehouse in the Central District being converted into affordable housing. She spent 3 days a week on site in her work boots, reading original drawings and talking to contractors. She loved it in a way she had almost forgotten she could love something about work. I am, she said. Is it good? She almost said none of your business, but the question was genuine, and she was tired of performing bitterness she didn't entirely feel. It's good, she said. Trevor nodded. I'm glad. She turned to go. Dana was waiting by the car at the curb. Isabelle. His voice stopped her. She turned back. The work you did on Cascade Tower, he said. I told people for years that I had a strong team. I never told them your name. I should have. She looked at him for a moment. That sentence cost him something. She could tell. Yes, she said. You should have. She walked down the steps. She did not feel like a woman who had won a battle. She felt like a woman who had been in one and was now finally on the other side of it. Spring came the way it does in Seattle, gradually, then all at once, with flowering cherries and the particular smell of wet earth warming up. Isabelle moved into a smaller place in Capitol Hill that she had chosen entirely for herself. High ceilings, a big drafting table by the window, a kitchen with a gas stove, a view of the hill that turned green and then fuller green over those first weeks. She cooked real dinners again. She called her sister on Sunday mornings. She went to her follow-up appointments and got clear scans and sat in the parking lot afterward and called Dana to tell her. And Dana had actually said, thank God, in a way that didn't sound professional at all. The warehouse project in the Central District became something beautiful. The engineering team held a small site completion ceremony in October, and Isabelle stood in the finished atrium. Original timber ceiling intact, new seismic supports invisible behind restored brick, and thought about the building's skeleton, how it had been there for 100 years holding weight without anyone noticing, and how the best structural work was the kind that let everything above it look effortless. She thought about that for a while. She was not thinking about Trevor. He had, it turned out, honored the settlement fully. His lawyers were professional and prompt, and there were no further attempts to complicate things. Dana said it was the cleanest post-litigation compliance she had seen from a high-net-worth dissolution. Isabelle thought that was probably Trevor's version of making amends, doing the thing he was required to do without being required to do it a second time. She could respect that, at least. Paige Holloway sent her a note in the spring, handwritten, which surprised her. It said, I've started over in a different city. I won't tell you I didn't know what I was part of, because I think on some level I did know, and I chose not to look at it directly. I'm trying to understand why I do that. I don't expect anything from you. I just didn't want to disappear without saying that what you did, not just surviving, but showing up, changed something in how I see myself. I hope your life is good. Yes, Isabelle read it twice, the way she had read Trevor's last message. She put this one in a different drawer. Some things didn't need a response. They needed to be kept. 14 months after the divorce was finalized, Isabelle was on a job site in South Lake Union, new mixed-use tower, foundation consultancy, early phase, when her phone showed a voicemail from Trevor. She listened to it standing beside a concrete form in the gray morning. His voice was careful. He said he had been working with his foundation board to restructure their grants program. He said one of the initiatives they were building was an engineering scholarship for women returning to technical careers after medical leave. He said he had named it, with the board's approval, after the Cascade Tower project. He said he hadn't done it for her response. He said he did it because it was the right shape for what he owed. She stood there in her hard hat and her muddy boots and listened to the whole message. Then she saved it. She didn't call back, not because she was still angry. She had done the work of not being angry. It had taken a long time and a good therapist and a lot of Sunday morning calls with her sister and an entire warehouse in the Central District and the specific piece of lying in her own bed in her own apartment with clear scans on the refrigerator and her drafting table by the window. She didn't call back because she didn't need to. She had built something real from what he thought would be rubble. She had her name on a building she was proud of. She had her health. She had her work. She had the warehouse atrium with the original timber ceiling and the invisible seismic supports doing their job in the dark. You learn, as a structural engineer, that the most important work is the kind no one sees, the load paths and the connections and the tension in the joints that keep everything above them standing. Isabelle had spent years doing that work for someone else's building. Now she was doing it for her own. That fall, Her firm was shortlisted for a preservation project in Portland, a craftsman-era municipal building, early 1900s, needing full seismic retrofit while keeping the facade intact. The kind of project that required patience and precision, and a specific kind of love for things that survived long enough to deserve saving. The project lead called her name in the proposal meeting, asked for her read on the foundation approach. Isabelle set down her coffee and stood up. She was not Trevor Ashworth's wife. She was not a patient in a treatment chair or a signature on a settlement agreement. She was not the woman he had believed was too tired to look up. She was the engineer in the room, and she began to speak.